"You can't pass," said the border guard, blocking the path of the black truck driver. But when she showed a secret military document, the man paled instantly. The scorching sunny sun hit the international highway asphalt, creating heat waves that distorted the arid landscape. Sarah Williams, a 34-year-old black woman, adjusted the faded military cap over her curly hair, trapped in a tight bun. His calloused hands firmly held the steering wheel of the huge dark blue Peterbilt truck as he approached the border control post. If you are enjoying this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Comment your city and the word justice if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of skin color. Sarah was not an ordinary trucker. Behind its simple appearance, worn jeans, white t-shirt and spent leather boots, a Special Force veteran was hidden with 15 years of military service. He had officially left the army 2 years ago, but some missions never really end. This was one of them. Pine Valley's border control post was known for its excessive rigor, especially with drivers who did not fit the expected profile. Sarah knew that, but she had no choice. The cargo that carried in his refrigerated trailer was more valuable than anyone in that place could imagine. When he stopped at the inspection cabin, Chief Inspector Marcus Reed emerged from the air conditioner like a predator coming out of his burrow. Reed was a 50-year-old man with a grey mustache and a perpetually suspicious expression. Her small, penetrating eyes scanned Sarah from top to bottom, and she could see prejudice forming on her face like storm clouds. "Documents?" Reed grunted, extending his fat hand without even greeting it. Sarah delivered her commercial driver's license, load certificates, and transportation manifesto. Everything was in perfect order. It had to be. Reed examined each document with a deliberate slowness, clearly looking for any excuse to complicate his passage. "What are you transporting?" he asked, although the answer was clearly marked in the papers. "Medical supplies to Riverside Central Hospital," Sarah replied with a calm and professional voice, maintaining direct eye contact. Reed walked around the truck, hitting the sides of the trailer with a metal rod. Sound echoed as war drums in the tense silence of the afternoon. Sarah watched each movement through the rearview mirrors, her hands relaxed on the wheel, but all muscles ready for action. "I will need to inspect the load," Reed announced with a malicious smile. Sarah knew this was not a standard protocol for documented medical supplies, but she also knew that arguing would only make the situation worse. What Reed didn't know was that within that seemingly common load of hospital equipment, there was something that could save hundreds of lives or cause an international incident to fall into the wrong hands. "Of course," she replied, coming down from the cabin with fluid and controlled movements. While walking toward the back of the trailer, Sarah discreetly touched the small communication device hidden in her belt. A red light blinked once, a sign that its location was being monitored. Her superiors knew exactly where she was, but would they arrive in time if things came out of control? Pine Valley's border control post had been built in the 1980s during a time of growing international tension. Its grey concrete structures and observation towers gave the place a military atmosphere that contrasted with the surrounding rural landscape. Sarah knew this type of installation well, had served on similar bases during her missions abroad. Reed opened the rear doors of the trailer with sudden movements, revealing organized rows of white boxes marked with international medical symbols. The cold air of the cooling system escaped like a ghostly mist, creating a dramatic contrast with the suffocating heat on the outside. "Hospital equipment, right?" Reed murmured, taking one of the smaller boxes. "It seems too heavy to be just medical material." Sarah kept her neutral expression, but internally calculated the possibilities. The Reed box held containing components of a new image diagnostic system that would revolutionize the treatment of trauma in conflict zones. Officially, it was just another medical equipment. Unofficially, it was classified military technology, disguised for a covered humanitarian operation. "Diagnostic equipment is naturally heavy," Sarah explained with professional patience. "Contains sensitive electronic components that need extra protection." 2 additional guards approached. Thompson, a young blonde in their nervous air, and Martinez, a high-expression, half-aged Hispanic woman. Sarah evaluated them quickly. Thompson seemed inexperienced and easily influential, while Martinez demonstrated the posture of someone who followed rigorous protocols. Reed began to open one of the boxes with a screwdriver, completely ignoring the safety seals that indicated that the content was sterile and should not be exposed to the external environment. "Lord," Martinez intervened hesitantly. Regulations say sealed medical equipment should not be opened without supervision of a qualified technician. Reed silenced her with a fierce look. I decide which regulations to follow here, Martinez. Do you have a problem with that? Sarah observed the dynamics between the three employees. Reed clearly abused his authority, while Martinez tried to maintain the procedures correct. Thompson just followed orders without question. It was a delicate situation that could climb quickly. I can call the destination hospital, Sarah offered calmly. They can confirm the inventory and provide technical information about the equipment. You don't have to call anyone, Reed growled, continuing to force the box opening. I know how to recognize smuggling when I see. At that moment, Sarah realized that Reed was not just being rigorous, he was actively looking for something he could use against her. Maybe it was racial prejudice, maybe it was a professional paranoia, or maybe he knew more about his mission than he should. The communication device in your belt has discreetly vibrated twice, a sign that your support team was monitoring the situation and preparing for intervention if necessary. Sarah touched the device once in response, indicating that she still had control of the situation. Reed finally managed to open the box, revealing a sophisticated medical equipment involved in protective foam. His eyes narrowed by examining the device, clearly frustrated for not finding anything obviously suspicious. This seems very advanced to a common hospital, he commented, taking the equipment with unprotected hands. Please don't touch the equipment directly, Sarah said firmly. It needs to remain sterile for medical use. Any contamination can compromise patient safety. Reed stopped, the equipment still in his hands. For a moment, Sarah saw uncertainty in her eyes. He knew he was violating protocols, but his pride did not allow him to retreat. It was then that Thompson pointed to something that would completely change the course of the situation. Boss, he said nervously, there's something strange in that side compartment of the trailer. Thompson's side compartment, had noticed, was part of the trailer's cooling system, but Sarah knew that her keen observation had detected something that shouldn't be visible. A small access panel that would normally be completely flush with the side of the trailer was slightly misaligned, the result of a last-minute modification made by your technical team. Reed immediately dropped the medical equipment and walked toward the place indicated by Thompson. His eyes shone with the satisfaction of those who finally found what they were looking for. Open this, he ordered, pointing to the panel. Sarah knew that within that compartment was the true heart of her mission, an ultra-secret military communication device that allowed real-time coordination with special forces in humanitarian operations. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it was the difference between life and death to medical teams in conflict zones. This is just a cooling system maintenance panel, Sarah explained, keeping her voice calm. There is nothing of interest inside. So you won't care if I take a look, Reed said, already looking for a tool to force the opening. Martinez approached, clearly uncomfortable with the escalation of the situation. Mr. Reed, perhaps we should follow the standard protocol. The documentation is in order, and we are delaying other vehicles. Reed turned to her with a contained fury. Martinez, if you can't do your job properly, I can find someone you get. Go back to your position. The tension in the air became palpable. Sarah realized that Reed was not just exercising authority, he was showing power, using his position to humiliate her and Martinez. It was a pattern she had often seen during her military service, insecure men offsetting her inadequacies through abuse of authority. Thompson, nervous about growing tension, began to examine other aspects of the truck. His hands shake slightly as he checked the tires and electrical connections, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. I found a screwdriver, Reed announced triumphantly, approaching the side panel. Sarah made a decision. She could not allow Reed to open that compartment, but she could not reveal her true identity without compromising the mission. There was only one option. Use your military authority indirectly. Mr. Reed, she said in a voice that carried a new authority, before proceeding, I would like to inform you that this load is under special federal jurisdiction. Any unauthorized interference can result in serious legal consequences. Reed stopped, the screwdriver of the panel. Federal jurisdiction? You didn't mention it before. It has not been necessary so far, Sarah replied, maintaining direct eye contact. But if you insist on proceeding with a non-standard inspection, I need to inform you about legal implications. Martinez approached again, this time with a more serious expression. "Mr. Reed, if there is federal jurisdiction involved, we need to follow specific protocols. We cannot simply—" "Shut up, Martinez," Reed exploded, his patience finally running out. "I command this post, and I decide what is protocol." Reed's explosion echoed by the control post, attracting the attention of other employees and drivers waiting in line. Sarah realized that the situation was going out of control quickly. Reed was clearly more interested in demonstrating power than following appropriate procedures. Thompson, frightened by the Reed scream, accidentally knocked down a small toolbox. The metallic noise cut the tense air like a shot, making everyone startled. It was at this moment of distraction that Sarah noticed something that completely changed her perception of the situation. On the Reed shirt, partially hidden under her security vest, there was a small mark, a discreet pin she immediately recognized. It was a symbol used by a paramilitary organization, known for its extremist trends and connections with white supremacy groups. Suddenly, Sarah understood that this was not a routine inspection motivated by casual prejudice. Reed knew exactly who she was and what she was carrying. This was a deliberate operation to intercept his mission. The device in his belt vibrated 3 times, maximum warning sign. His support team had detected suspicious movement in the area. Sarah realized she was walking straight into a carefully planned trap. Recognition of the extremist pin has completely changed Sarah's perception of the situation. She now understood that she was not dealing with a common prejudiced inspector, but with someone who possibly had group connections that actively opposed military humanitarian operations in certain regions of the world. Martinez, apparently oblivious to the true nature of Reed, continued to try to mediate the situation. "Mr. Reed, can I suggest that we contact the regional supervisor? If there are questions of federal jurisdiction, he needs to be aware." "We won't contact anyone," Reed cut sharply, but Sarah noticed a slight hesitation in her voice. He was clearly following a plan, but the mention of superior supervisors made him nervous. Thompson, still shaken by the previous confrontation, shyly approached Sarah. "Madam, sorry for the confusion. This is usually not how we do things here. Inspector Reed has been different in recent weeks." This information intrigued Sarah. "Different how?" "Strict, especially with certain types of drivers," Thompson whispered, nervously looking at Reed. "And he has received a lot of private calls during office hours. Yesterday I saw him talking to some men in a black car I had never seen before." Sarah quickly processed this information. Reed was not acting alone. He was part of a larger network. The timing of his mission had been compromised, which meant that there was a leak somewhere in the chain of command. His communication device vibrated in a specific sequence, 3 short vibrations, 1 long, 2 short. It was a code she knew well. Confirmed infiltration, proceed with extreme caution. His support team had identified the threat and was positioning himself. Reed, apparently frustrated with the delay, made a drastic decision. "Thompson, call the center and request a complete inspection team. We will unload this whole trailer and examine each item individually." Sarah knew she couldn't allow it. A complete inspection would reveal not only hidden communication equipment, but also other classifieds disguised among legitimate medical supplies. In addition, every minute of delay put the humanitarian operation at risk that depended on the punctual arrival of these supplies. "This will take hours," Martinez protested. "We have other vehicles waiting, and regulations set time limits for refrigerated medical load inspections." Reed ignored Martinez completely, focusing on his attention entirely in Sarah. "You look very calm to someone about to have their load completely searched. Most drivers would be nervous." Sarah kept her neutral expression. "I have no reason to be nervous. My documentation is in order, my load is legitimate, and I have deadlines to fulfill." "Deadlines," Reed repeated slowly. "What kind of deadlines are so important for medical equipment?" It was a trap question, and Sarah knew that. Any very specific answer could reveal operational information, but a very vague response would confirm the suspicions of Reed. "Programmed surgeries," she simply answered. "Patients waiting for procedures that depend on these equipment." At this point, a car approached the control post, a black sedan with dark glass that stopped in the administrative parking lot instead of entering the inspection line. Sarah noted discreetly as 2 men in suit came out of the vehicle. They did not look like regular government officials. Thompson also noticed the car. "Boss, those are the same men as yesterday," he murmured to Reed. Reed was visibly tense. Go back to your post, Thompson, and keep your mouth closed. Sarah realized that the situation was becoming more complex every minute. Not only was Reed trying to sabotage his mission, but he had external support. Sedan men were probably their contacts in the extremist organization. Her military training warned her that she was walking to a situation of multiple threats. It was time to activate emergency protocols. The two men of the black sedan walked toward the group with measured and deliberate steps. Sarah evaluated them instantly. The first was tall and thin, with visible scars in the hands that suggested military or paramilitary experience. The second was lower and more corpulent, with sunglasses that could not completely hide an expression of cold cruelty. "Reed," the high man said simply, as if it were a fulfillment and an order at the same time. "Colonel," Reed answered, and Sarah immediately noticed the change in his posture, from arrogant authority to respectful subordination. This confirmed his suspicions. Reed was not the leader of this operation, just a pawn. The man Reed had called Colonel turned his attention to Sarah, studying her with penetrating eyes. "So you are the famous Sarah Williams. Your reputation precedes it." Sarah felt a cold shiver through her spine. Not only did they know about their mission, they knew who she was personally. This meant that the leakage of information was much deeper than she had imagined. "Sorry, but we don't know each other," Sarah answered calmly, keeping her civil identity by the trucker. The colonel smiled coldly. "Of course we know each other, Sergeant Williams, or should he say former sergeant. Operation Desert Storm, 2003. Rescue mission in Fallujah. You saved 17 Iraqi civilians from a chemical gas attack." Sarah's blood froze. That operation was highly classified. Only a handful of people had access to these details, and all had maximum security authorization. Martinez and Thompson watched the conversation with growing confusion and alarm. It was obvious that something far beyond a routine inspection was happening. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah insisted, but her mind was running. How did these men have access to classified military information? The second man, who had remained silent, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, as if it had been damaged by smoke or chemicals. "That operation in Fallujah has saved many innocent lives. Unfortunately, it also prevented certain business opportunities, if they came to fruition." Sarah started to understand. During the Fallujah operation, his team had discovered evidence that private companies were selling chemical weapons to both sides of the conflict. His report had resulted in the closing of several of these operations and in the arrest of several executives. "You are mercenaries," she said, "no longer trying to keep your identity false. Entrepreneurs," the colonel corrected, "and you, my face, have been a stone in the shoe of our business for years." Reed, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, intervened. "Colonel, perhaps we should focus on the load." "The load is secondary," the hoarse voice said sharply. "What matters is sending a clear message. Military humanitarian operations are not welcome in certain regions." Sarah realized she was at the center of something much larger than a simple interception of medical supplies. These men represented interests that profited with prolonged conflicts and human suffering. Successful humanitarian operations were bad for their business. Martinez, who had been listening in increasing silence, finally found the courage to speak. "I don't know what's going on here, but this is not a standard protocol. I'll call my supervisor." The colonel turned to her with an expression that made Martinez back instinctively. "I wouldn't do that if it was you, Miss Martinez. Your daughter studies at Riverside Primary School, wouldn't it?" The explicit threat made Martinez pale. Thompson, realizing that the situation had scaled far beyond his understanding, began to move slowly. Sarah knew she had reached the point of no return. These men had no intention of simply confiscating their load. They wanted to eliminate it and use their death as a warning to other similar operations. Discreetly, she activated the emergency device on her belt. 3 long touches, sign of critical situation, immediate intervention necessary. "Well," the colonel said, checking his watch, "I think we've talked enough. Reed, finish what needs to be done." Reed hesitated for a moment, looking at Martinez and Thompson. "And they?" "Witnesses are always complicated," the horseman replied casually. It was at this moment that Sarah heard a sound that changed everything. The distant but unmistakable noise of helicopters approaching. The sound of helicopters grew rapidly, echoing through the arid hills surrounding the control post. Sarah immediately acknowledged the flight pattern. 2 military helicopters in attack formation, approaching low altitude to avoid radar detection until the last moment. The colonel and his partner exchanged alarmed looks. Clearly they did not expect such a quick and coordinated answer. "This was not on the plane," the hoarse voice murmured, his hand moving instinctively towards something under his coat. Reed panicked. "You said that would be discreet. They said no one would know." "Shut up and think," the colonel ordered sharply, his eyes quickly calculating the available options. "How many men do you have at this post?" "Just the three of us," Reed replied nervously, "but there are armed guards in the observation tower." Sarah realized that this was her opportunity. With the imminent arrival of military support, the dynamics of power had changed dramatically. She no longer needed to keep her identity false. "Martinez," she said with military authority, "Clara, take Thompson and move away from here immediately." They go to the administrative building and locate themselves inside. Martinez, still in shock with the previous threat against his daughter, hesitated. "But I can't leave my post." "Now it's not time to follow bureaucratic protocols," Sarah said firmly. "Your life and Thompson's are in real danger." Colonel laughed bitterly. "Very touching, Sergeant, but your friends in the helicopters won't arrive in time to save everyone." The helicopters were now clearly visible on the horizon, approaching rapidly. Sarah could see that they were Black Hawk's military, probably carrying a special operations team. Its GPS location had been monitored throughout the mission, and the emergency signal had activated rapid response protocols. Thompson, finally understanding the severity of the situation, began to run towards the administrative building. "Martinez, let's go. This is not our problem." Reed pulled a gun from his holster, but his hands trembled visibly. It was obvious that he was not prepared for real armed confrontation. His experience was limited to intimidating unarmed drivers. "Reed," the hoarse voice said calmly, "you know what happens to people who fail in your responsibilities to us." The implicit threat made Reed harden his expression. He pointed the gun at Sarah, trying to recover some control of the situation. "Everyone to the floor," he shouted, his voice breaking slightly. Sarah didn't move. Her years of military training had taught her to read people under pressure, and Reed was clearly out of her comfort zone. He was dangerous precisely because he was desperate and poorly trained. The helicopters were now directly above the control post, creating a dust and debris storm. String went down from the aircraft, and figures dressed in black began to go down quickly. The colonel gestured to his partner, who immediately began to move toward the black sedan. It was obvious that they had a prepared escape plan. "This is not over, Williams," the colonel shouted about the noise of the rotors. "You may have won today, but there are others like us. Many others." Sarah knew he was right. This interception was just a symptom of a much larger problem. Special forces touched the soil with military accuracy, moving immediately to tactical positions around the control post. Sarah recognized the team leader, Captain James Rodriguez, a veteran she had served in 2 previous missions. His presence confirmed that this operation had top priority. "Sergeant Williams' status report," Rodriguez shouted through the communicator, even while his team spread to surround the suspects. 3 hostile identified, 2 civil servants in security, compromised mission but intact load, Sarah responded quickly, using precise military terminology that allowed efficient communication in high-voltage situations. Reed, being surrounded by highly trained soldiers, let his gun fall to the floor and raised his hands. His fantasies of power had broken down at the reality of a royal military confrontation. The colonel and his partner, however, did not surrender so easily. They moved quickly toward the black sedan, using the vehicle as coverage as they pulled their own weapons. "Rodriguez," Sarah shouted. "They have high-level classified information. We need to get them alive for interrogation." "Understood," Rodriguez replied, making gestures for his team to adjust their non-lecture tactics for capture. It was at this moment that Sarah realized something that changed her perspective on the whole situation. Among the equipment that the colonel carried, it briefly glimpsed a military communication device, not a civil or commercial model, but an official equipment of the armed forces. The implication was devastating. These men were not just mercenaries with access to leaked information. They had active military equipment, which meant that there were collaborators within the armed forces themselves. "Rodriguez," she shouted urgently, "check the communication channels. They may be intercepting our transmissions in real time." Rodriguez immediately understood the implication and made a gesture for his team to change to emergency communication protocols. It was a precaution that could save lives if there was really infiltration into military communication systems. The man with a hoarse voice, realizing that his technological advantage had been discovered, made a desperate decision. He threw a grenade of smoke, creating a dense curtain that obscured everyone's vision at the scene. Sarah, using her urban combat experience, immediately moved to a position that would allow her to intercept any attempted escape. She knew that men like the Colonel always had planned escape routes. Through smoke, she heard the sound of an engine being turned on, not the black sedan but something smaller and more agile. They had prepared a secondary escape vehicle. "Motorcycle, leaving the east side," she shouted at Rodriguez, even as she ran toward the sound. His intuition was correct. The Colonel had set up a modified military motorcycle that was hidden behind the administrative building. The horseman was trying to follow him, but stumbled into the dense smoke. Sarah didn't hesitate. Years of body combat training have automatically taken action. She threw herself over the horseman, knocking him down before he could reach the second motorcycle. "You don't understand," he gasped as Sarah immobilized him. "This is much bigger than you think. We're just shallow soldiers." "Then tell me who the generals are," Sarah replied, applying an arm key that made him completely defenseless. Rodriguez and his team emerged from smoke, having lost the Colonel, but captured Reed and now the second conspirator. It was a partial victory, but Sarah knew that the information that could extract from these prisoners would be valuable. Martinez and Thompson emerged cautiously from the administrative building, clearly traumatized but unharmed. Sarah realized that they would have to go through extensive debriefing and possibly temporary protection until the extent of the conspiracy was determined. "The mission continues," Rodriguez said, checking the trailer. "Can you still deliver?" Sarah looked at her truck, then to the prisoners, then to the horizon where the Colonel had disappeared. "Yes," she responded, with renewed determination. "But now we know that there are more people trying to prevent humanitarian operations. This can't look like this." 2 hours later, the control post had turned into a temporary operations base. Military technicians examined the confiscated equipment of the conspirators, while interrogation experts worked with Reed and the hoarse voice man in mobile trailers that had been brought by a helicopter. Sarah was in the makeshift control center, studying maps and intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture. The conspiracy was much broader than anyone had imagined. The communication equipment they had a state-of-the-art. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, a military intelligence expert who had arrived with the second wave of reinforcements. Someone with maximum level access is providing military technology to private organizations. Rodriguez approached a dark expression. The initial interrogation revealed worrying information. Reed confessed that he was recruited 6 months ago by a network that identifies as cleaning operation. They specifically oppose military humanitarian missions in certain regions. Sarah studied the data on the tablet that Hayes handed her. "Look at the standards. All missions that have been sabotaged in the last 2 years had one thing in common. They interfered with operations of private security companies or military contractors. Mercenaries protecting their territories," Hayes agreed, "but the level of coordination and resources suggests institutional support. Someone very high in the command chain is making it easier." Martinez, who had insisted on staying to help with whatever he could, approached hesitantly. "Sorry to interrupt, but I remembered something that may be important. Reed received a call this morning, just before the lady arrived. He said something about the package was coming on time and interception would be clean." Sarah and Rodriguez exchanged significant looks. "They knew exactly when I would arrive," Sarah murmured. "It was no coincidence. Someone with access to the mission schedule informed them." Hayes checked his own communication device. "I just received reports from 3 similar incidents in the last 48 hours. Humanitarian missions being delayed by administrative problems at different border points. It is a coordinated operation," Rodriguez concluded. "They are trying to interrupt multiple missions simultaneously." Sarah felt a growing determination. "What is the status of my original load?" "Intact and ready for transport," Hayes replied. "But considering what we know now, it would be prudent to wait until we have a complete escort." "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Every time of delay means more lives at risk at the destination hospital. In addition, if we wait, we give them time to reorganize their defenses." Rodriguez studied the remaining route map. "There are 2 more control points before the final destination. If this cleaning operation is as coordinated as it seems, they probably have people positioned in both. So let's give them something unexpected," Sarah said, a plan starting to form in her mind. "Hayes, can you track the communications that intercepted confiscated equipment?" "Possibly. Why?" Because we will use their own network against them, Sarah explained. If we can send false information through committed communication channels, we can make them position themselves in the wrong places. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since he had arrived. A misinformation operation. We make them think you are taking a route when you are actually taking another. Exactly. But it will require perfect timing and total coordination, Sarah said, looking at each team member. And there is a considerable risk. If they find out the mistake, we will be facing a much greater force and better prepared. Hayes checked his equipment again. Technicians say they can have the misinformation system ready by 1 hour. Perfect, Sarah said, heading back to her truck. Because I have a delivery to do and no one will stop me. The colonel had said that this was not over. He was right, but Sarah Williams was about to show him and his organization that they had chosen the wrong opponent. The misinformation operation was placed in motion with military accuracy. Using confiscated communication equipment, the Hayes team sent false information through the committed network, indicating that Sarah had changed her route and would be passing through the North Control Post at 18 hours. In fact, Sarah was driving along the South route, a more dangerous but less monitored secondary road. Rodriguez and an elite team followed her at a distance in civil vehicles, ready to intervene if necessary. The plan seemed to be working until Sarah received an emergency broadcast on her radio. Williams, hear Hayes. We have a problem. The colonel did not bite the bait. Our satellites have detected significant movement on the southern route, at least 12 vehicles positioning themselves for an ambush. Sarah felt her blood freezing. How did they find out? We are still investigating, but we suspect that there is more than one leakage source. Someone very close to the command center has access to our operations in real time. Rodriguez intervened in communication. Sarah, you need to abort. We're talking about a much superior force than we can face. Sarah looked at the trailer in her rearview mirrors, thinking about patients who depended on the equipment she was carrying. Negative. There are people dying while we talk. I will continue. Sergeant Williams, Colonel Hayes's firm voice echoed on the radio. This is a direct order. Abort the mission and return to base. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She had spent 15 years following military orders without question. But this time something was different. This was not just a military mission, it was a matter of basic humanity. With all due respect, Colonel, this load does not belong to the army. It belongs to civilians who will die without it. I will complete the delivery. Sarah hung up the radio and stepped deep into the throttle. The ambush came 15 minutes later, exactly where Hayes had predicted. Vehicles emerged from hidden positions in the hills, blocking the road ahead and behind Sarah. She was completely surrounded. The colonel emerged from one of the vehicles, clearly furious to have been initially deceived. Get out of the truck, Williams. This time there is no rescue team coming to save her. Sarah slowly descended from the cabin, her hands visible but prepared for action. She quickly told men, 15 armed opponents, all with professional military equipment. You should have accepted the first offer, the colonel said, approaching with a gun pointed at her. Now this will be much more complicated for everyone involved. The only complicated thing here, Sarah answered calmly, is to explain to patients' families because their loved ones died, because you wanted to protect your dirty profits. Colonel laughed bitterly. Always the moral heroine. Don't you understand that operations like you're destroying whole economies, regions that depend on conflict for livelihood, regions that you keep in artificially conflict, Sarah said. It was then that she heard a familiar sound, the distant noise of helicopters approaching again, but this time there was something different. The sound was more intense, more coordinated. The colonel also heard and frowned. Impossible. We intercepted all communications. Sarah smiled for the first time in hours. You have intercepted military communications, but you forgot that former military personnel have their own networks. Before leaving for the South route, Sarah had activated an emergency protocol that few knew. A network of military veterans who worked in legitimate private security. When soldiers in humanitarian missions were in danger, this network responded without questions and without bureaucracy. The approaching helicopters were not official military. They were a force of volunteer veterans who had decided that some causes were worth personal risk. Colonel, one of the colonel's men shouted nervously, there are at least 6 aircraft. We are in clear numerical disadvantage. The colonel looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed anger and something that could have been respect. You are more resourceful than I imagined. I learned from the best, Sarah replied. "And one of the things I learned is that when you fight something bigger than yourself, you always find unexpected allies." The helicopters were now visible on the horizon, quickly approaching in combat formation. The colonel made his final decision. The colonel slowly lowered his gun, realizing that he was in an impossible situation. His men, seeing the helicopters approaching and listening to the deafening noise of the rotors, began to retreat to their vehicles. "This is not over, Williams," he said, but his voice had lost the previous authority. "There are many like us, and not everyone will be as civilized. Then we will be ready for them too," Sarah responded with unshakable determination. The helicopters landed in coordinated formation, raising clouds of dust that temporarily obscured the vision. When the dust dropped, 15 highly trained veterans had completely surrounded the colonel's mercenaries. The difference was that these men and women fought for conviction, not money. The leader of the veteran force, a black man with visible combat scars, approached Sarah. "Sergeant Williams, retired Colonel Marcus Johnson. We received his emergency signal." "Colonel Johnson," Sarah greeted militarily. "Thank you for answering. Is the situation under control?" Johnson looked at the surrounded mercenaries. "Completely. My men will escort them back to the competent authorities. You have a delivery to do." The mercenary colonel and his men were disarmed and detained without resistance. Faced with a superior force motivated by principles rather than profit, they understood that any resistance would be useless. Sarah returned to her truck, but before leaving, Johnson approached again. "Williams," he said low, "what you did today goes beyond simple delivery. You have proven that there are still people willing to fight for what is right, regardless of personal consequences." "I just did my job," Sarah answered modestly. "No," Johnson shook his head. "You did a lot more than that. You remembered all of us because we served first." 2 hours later, Sarah arrived at the Riverside Central Hospital. The waiting medical team received the equipment with visible gratitude. Some of the doctors had tears in their eyes when they saw the supplies that would save lives. Dr. Elena Martinez, the chief surgeon, approached Sarah while the equipment was discharged. "We heard from the radio that there were complications during transport. Thank you for not giving up. Some things are too important to give up," Sarah answered simply. That night, Sarah received a call from Hayes. The interrogation of the prisoners revealed the complete extension of the cleaning operation. "We were able to identify and arrest 17 collaborators at different levels of the government and the armed forces. The network was completely dismantled. And the leakage of information? Solved. He was a high patent officer who was being blackmailed. He cooperated completely after being confronted with the evidence." Sarah felt a deep satisfaction. Not only had it completed its mission, but had helped to expose a conspiracy that threatened future humanitarian operations. 3 months later, Sarah received an official letter from the Defense Department, offering him a permanent position coordinating military humanitarian operations. She accepted without hesitation. His first official mission was to establish security protocols that would prevent future infiltrations in humanitarian operations. The program was named Protocol Williams, in his honor. The mercenary colonel was right about one thing: this was not over, but he was wrong about who would win at the end. A year later, Sarah Williams was standing on a Pentagon podium, receiving the service medal distinguished by her actions in the cleaning operation. In the audience, she could see family faces: Rodriguez, Hayes, Johnson, and even Martinez from the control post, who had become a vocal defender of reforms in border inspection procedures. "Sergeant Williams exemplifies the best of American military service," said General Patterson during the ceremony. "She proved that a person with strong convictions can make a difference even when facing seemingly impossible adversities." After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by a young soldier. "Mom, I read about your actions. I was inspired to apply for humanitarian operations." Sarah smiled, remembering when she herself was young and idealistic. "Work is not easy," she said, "but when you save a life, when you make a difference to someone who needs help, it's all worth it." That night, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Elena Martinez from the Central Hospital of Riverside. "Sarah, you need to know," the doctor said excitedly. "The equipment you delivered saved 127 lives in the first month. We have a new wing of trauma working, and we're treating patients who would have no chance before." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me, doctor. That means everything to me." After turning off, Sarah looked out the window of her apartment in Washington, D.C., seeing the city lights extend to the horizon. Somewhere outside, I knew there were other people like the Colonel, trying to profit from human suffering. But I also knew there were people like Johnson, Rodriguez, Hayes, and so many others willing to fight for what was right. His phone rang again. It was Hayes with details of a new humanitarian mission that needed coordination. Sarah smiled and answered the call. The work never ended, but it would not exchange this responsibility for anything in the world. Some battles are worth fighting, and some wins are worth all the risks. If you have watched here, comment "I watched the end" and tell us what impressed you most about this story of courage and determination. Sarah Williams' journey shows us that a particular person can face corrupt systems and make a real difference in the world. Its story is a powerful reminder that, regardless of skin color, origin, or circumstances, when we fight for something larger than ourselves, we find forces that we didn't even know we had. Also, comment your city and the word justice if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. This story was inspired by the countless anonymous people who, every day, make courageous choices to help others, even when no one is looking. They are drivers, doctors, soldiers, civil servants, and ordinary citizens who decide to do what is right, even when it is difficult. Don't forget to click on the video that will appear on the final screen to watch more inspiring stories like this. Your next dose of motivation is just one click away. Thank you for following this journey with us. Until the next story.